NBA player is being investigated for throwing games. No Miles Turner for the Lakers. 10-minute quarters in the NBA. Why Adam Silver has fallen off as a commissioner. Also, we've got two guests. One talk about Jimmy Butler and the Miami Heat, and also the Michigan sign stealing scandal. That's coming up next on a jam-packed episode of The Big Lead. What is up, and welcome to another episode of The Big Lead. My name is Doug McKain. You can follow me on X and Instagram at DMac_LA. I've been covering sports for over a decade, 24/7 sports, Bleacher Report, Dodgers Nation. I cover the Rams for Locked On. I also do NFL radio for Westwood One. And if you're new to the show, subscribe to the show, because if it's a big story in sports, the hottest stories in sports, the big leads, you're going to hear it right here. We're going to dive into all the biggest stories so you guys know everything you need to know about the world of sports in less than an hour. But we've got a jam-packed show, so we're going to dive right into it because we got a bombshell early today, and it was about Terry Rozier. Jontay Porter may not be the only NBA player involved in manipulating sports and his performance in games. The Wall Street Journal reported today that federal investigators are looking into unusual betting activity related to current Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier during his time with the Hornets. Now, the date that they are investigating, the game that they're looking into, was back on March 23rd, 2023. And it was a game that Terry Rozier was participating in. He looked like he was fine. And then with less than 10 minutes in the game against the New Orleans Pelicans, he ends up leaving that game. It says, in March of 2023, the NBA was alerted to unusual betting activity related to Terry Rozier's performance in a game between Charlotte and New Orleans. The league conducted an investigation, and it did not find a violation of the NBA rules. We are now aware of an investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of New York related to this matter and have been cooperating with the investigation. So the NBA is claiming that there are no issues on hand here, but clearly there's something up, because a couple years ago on X, there was a user that has the handle Garen Bergdefs. He posted, "At least I was in on it today. Got lucky that I was fed some inside info that Rozier was leaving in the first or second quarter, depending on the game flow and the live lines, so that his unders would hit." Now, the user actually posted a picture that he bet on Terry Rozier at $122. So he made a $100 profit. But for this game, the Hornets, I mean, it was a pretty much a terrible game for Terry Rozier. He left with the ankle injury, and nothing really came about it. And first thing I want to say, too, is if you're this guy, why are you posting betting information online? Why are you posting tips online? I mean, that feels like more of a confession that you're bragging or something like that. Why is it going to that situation? It reminds me of the scene from The Wire. Are you effing taking notes during a criminal conspiracy? I mean, it didn't make any sense. So we'll see what happens with Terry Rozier, but this does not look good. I feel like the biggest problem right now for NBA players that are linked to any of this type of nonsense and this type of action is, look, you don't want to get involved. You're already very well paid, and this is probably about the stupidest thing you could ever do if you're Terry Rozier. But I also want to investigate it, too, of his performance in Game 7 of the 2018 Eastern Conference Finals when he was just straight up awful. But I really hope this is nothing real, because this is pretty bad, and it just goes to show this is the NBA in 2025, because I'm pretty sure you'd see this segment reported, and that segment might be sponsored by DraftKings. So, unfortunately, this is another dark chapter for the Miami Heat, which is what they're dealing with recently. But please tell me it ain't so scary, Terry. But we got J-Rob rocking with us as always. J-Rob, what are your thoughts on this story?
To read even further into the tea leaves with this thing. I think this is the same probe that dealt with just Jonte Porter and his situation. So I do wonder, is this group that is involved with the gambling side of manipulating NBA players to really risk their entire careers and jail time over one bet? It makes me wonder, are these people who are influencing these players, is this a bigger thing afoot? I just find it hard to believe that Jonte Porter and Terry Rozier are the only ones linked to this thing. I think this is a bigger story than we're leading on.
I think you're right. I mean, I think that there's got to be more players potentially involved. I mean, that would definitely open up Pandora's box as far as a major investigation. But just on the surface, it's stupid. So why would players that, I mean, you look at his career earnings, over $100 million. Why would someone like Terry Rozier be involved in a betting scandal? So hopefully this is guys bragging. This is guys trying to make it seem like they're insiders. I mean, that's certainly a problem. But for the most part, this is an issue. Anytime you bring up gambling, that's when the feds get involved. When the feds get involved, people get arrested. People go to jail. They don't just get fines slapped onto them. So I hope this isn't true. This would be very ugly. We saw what happened in Major League Baseball with Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter, Ippei Mizuhara. Turned out that Ippei Mizuhara was just a felon that was stealing from Shohei Ohtani. So let's let the facts present themselves. Let's see how this unfolds. But the truth is, as of right now, he has not been accused of a crime or any wrongdoing. So that's just the report. So you're going to get widespread speculation on Reddit, on the internet, on the X. But I'll wait. But I kind of really want to rewatch the game, to be honest with you, because he goes down with a foot injury, and then he would go on to miss the team's final 8 games. I think that needs to be mentioned as well. If it was one game, I get it. Sure. You roll your ankle and you leave that game, and then maybe you find a way to help someone out from a gambling standpoint, but he missed the final 8 games. He's already signed big contracts. Would he be that stupid? Because if he did, this would be one of the dumbest things that any athlete has ever done.
His financial decisions are.
No, exactly. No, that's 100% the truth, right? But stay in the association. Let's talk about Adam Silver. Adam Silver was on Dan Patrick's show, and Dan Patrick was playing along. He was having fun, and he asked him, what are some things that he considered doing to change the league that could maybe add a spark to a league that has ratings on the decline, that has a lot of issues right now as far as their overall product. And a couple of things that Adam Silver said. Well, the first one was a 2 free throws for a foul on a 3-point attempt. But the one that really stood out was him saying he wanted to go to 10-minute quarters. And he mentioned that international rules, you have 10-minute quarters. I think this really is one of the final nails in the coffin for me for Adam Silver. When Adam Silver stepped onto the scene, he got a lot of credit early on for removing Donald Sterling. And he was champion in the league, and everyone thought that he was going to be this era's David Stern. The league has gotten worse under Adam Silver. And for your solution to be less basketball, that doesn't make any sense to me. They don't need less basketball. They need less BS. And what I mean by that is games that start on time, less commercials, less of a issue at the free throw line where it takes 2 minutes to shoot free throws. The problem is not the amount of time that are during quarters. I mean, that's just the most ridiculous thing ever. Imagine you putting your hard-earned money to go see a game and you get 10-minute quarters. That, to me, is also saying that your product isn't good enough. I don't ever remember saying, oh, I want a lot less football. I want a lot less baseball. Give me 7-inning games in baseball. Rob Manfred had a lot of success shortening the game because of the pitch clock. Ratings have gone up in Major League Baseball. Attendance has gone up. Major League Baseball just had over $12 billion in revenue, was a record high. So I just think this is ridiculous. For people who actually go to the games, to have basically 1/6 of the game taken away, I don't think they're going to take 1/6 of the price of those tickets away. So another L from Adam Silver. Fans don't want this. I've never heard fans say, okay, give me less basketball. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like the fans just saying, hey, Adam, the games are dragging along. The games aren't starting on time. We hate the delays. We want better gameplay. And what does Adam Silver say? Okay, well, let's just keep all the same delays and we'll have less gameplay. Doesn't make any sense. I think the NBA needs a new commissioner. I'm not saying this is the reason why, but clearly the league isn't in a good place as far as overall health. What I would do to change the NBA right now, I think you have to add some scarcity to the regular season. Now, if you had less than 82 games, that would impact the overall records all time. But I think the first thing you could attempt to do is shorten the amount of games in the playoffs. The first round shouldn't be 7 games. It should be a 5-game first round in the playoffs. After that, it's debatable whether you want to keep it at 7 games, but that's what we've seen throughout the history of this league, so I'm fine with that. But really, the NBA has a storyline problem. They have the inability to sell their best players. So many uninteresting players. Look at last night's game. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander goes for 52. He's basically the opposite for point shaving. He's the guy that messes up my parlay because he scores too many points, right? Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has the 11th best-selling jersey in the NBA, and he's a top 3 player. When KD and Russ were in OKC, they had top 5 selling jerseys. Luka Doncic, big fan base, doesn't have the same juice as some of the players we've seen in the past that have been top 5 players. The NBA, they need an influx of players that fans care about. I think you see Cooper Flagg, someone like that people actually care about. I saw a funny tweet that said, Cooper Flagg is the LeBron James of Gordon Hayward's, right? I think that is a name. You need Wemby to continue to emerge. But the truth of the matter is the NBA has a star problem right now versus the games are too long. I have never seen people complain about the games. I watch a lot of Major League Baseball. It says it's going to start at 7:10. Hell, it starts at 7:10. I watch a lot of the NFL. It said it's a 110 kick, a 105 kick. That ball is getting towed to pigskin at 105. The NBA, you lollygag around. You don't even start the game on time. So let's find a way to get those game times started on time before we talk about shortening the game. But, Rob, any thoughts on the 10-minute quarters in the association? Adam Silver's brilliant idea.
Oh, I think it's an awful idea. I don't even understand it. It feels like Adam Silver over the last few years is really attempting anything to be this, for the product to be major in terms of its marketing. I mean, he tried the play-in tournament. I don't even think the players themselves like that idea. And I don't think fans are overly thinking about the play-in tournament. How would you want to be a Kings fan? You get the 8th seed and you still might not make the playoffs. You know what I'm saying? I look at, this idea of the shot clocks going from a square to a circle. Who cares about that? I just feel like Adam Silvers has these ideas that he thinks fans are going to be like, oh my God, yeah, you should incorporate that in the NBA. I saw a thing on Clutch Points just about him as potentially putting a European expansion league to the NBA. And I think the reality is it's just about getting back to basketball. It's the product. Where are the dynasties? Who are you marketing? Adam Silver trying to hang his hat on Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, and LeBron James to be the faces of his league. Yeah, they can do that up to this point, but you need to get ready because they're not going to be here forever.
Absolutely. That's hello. That's absolutely the main problem, for sure. I totally agree. But next, we're going to talk about Myles Turner. So Myles Turner has been on the Lakers' radar for years now, and the Lakers clearly have their hearts dead set on adding a center, and that's going to be the absolute key. If the Lakers don't add a center to pair alongside Anthony Davis, I see it it's very unlikely they're going to make a deep run in the playoffs, that they're going to be legitimate contenders to hoist a Larry O. But Mark Stein is reporting that Myles Turner is probably not going to be dealt by the Pacers. Mark Stein wrote on his Substack, the Pacers' phones are undeniably ringing with interest in Myles Turner. That was inevitable with Turner just months away from unrestricted free agency now, yet the prevailing league-wide sense 1 week out from the trade buzzer is that the Pacers do not want to trade Turner. There's a strong belief among league personnel that Indiana would need to see proposals that return a starting level center or even consider the notion of adding another big. So Myles Turner is certainly a guy that can help this team, averaging 15.4 points per game, 6.8 rebounds, gives you a defensive boost as well. The most important thing that Myles Turner would bring is it would push Anthony Davis off that center spot. This season, AD has played center 96% of his minutes. When the Lakers won a title in 2019, 2020, he played center for 40% of his minutes. So the number one thing the Lakers need to try to do at the deadline is find a way to make a move where Anthony Davis can play 50% or less of his minutes at the center spot. It is a untenable exercise for them. You just can't have to do it. The wear and tear, the way the offense runs, you need AD to play more for. So it looks like J-Rob, you might not be getting your guy in LA.
I'm disappointed about that, but you know what? You know what I got the realization of? Larry Bird is a consultant for the Indiana Pacers, and I can't see a world where Larry Bird would help the Los Angeles Lakers. So I'll leave it at that, but also I'll leave it to, I've said this before, there's a Lakers tax in the NBA. If the Los Angeles Lakers want to get a deal done, most teams are going to make it hard for them just because of the cachet of the organization. And I can't see a world where Larry Bird and the Pacers are trying to do any favors for the Los Angeles Lakers.
Yeah, I mean, and it's just a lack of assets, right? I mean, you haven't hit on Jalen Hood-Schifino. You don't have a really nice war chest to go and make these big trades when other teams are out there trying to make moves. And I think you're right, too. I mean, people do not want to help the Lakers. They don't want to get taken advantage of. And look, Rob Pelinka hasn't executed these trades in the last couple of years that have really taken this team to the next level and allowed LeBron and AD to go chase another championship. So they got to do something, though. They got to do something, because if they don't, you're going to have an unhappy AD. You're going to have an unhappy LeBron. It's going to feel like this franchise is just stuck in neutral, that they're in purgatory as a group that's not a legitimate contender. So we'll see. We'll see what Rob Pelinka can pull off. The Lakers have explored looking at Jonas Valanciunas and Nikola Vucevic and names like that. But the Lakers have already told us that their asking price is too high for those guys. But, yeah, you can't buy a house that's not for sale. And clearly that Miles Turner mansion is not on the market. But next, we got our big interview, and that is with Wes Goldberg. He covers the Miami Heat for the Miami Herald, the Ringer. And this guy knows the Miami Heat just about as much as anyone on the planet. And we got a chance to talk about Jimmy Butler. And he has 3 teams that he thinks makes sense for Jimmy Buckets that should actually want him on their roster, that could actually turn them into a championship contender. Had a little bit of a debate here, but here's my interview with Wes Goldberg about the Jimmy Butler situation in Miami. And we are joined by Wes Goldberg. He's the host of the Locked On Heat podcast. You read his stuff for The Ringer, the Miami Herald, fan side of this guy is one of the worldwide global Miami Heat ball knowers. Thank you so much for joining us here, my man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Wes, first thing let's get into, I mean, just from your end, covering this team, covering the Jimmy Butler saga from start to finish, where do you think the Miami Heat are right now? Where do you think Jimmy Butler is at right now? And how confident are you that a deal gets done before the February 6th NBA trade deadline?
That's a great question. I'm fairly confident that the Heat will get something done. It might not be this amazing return that the Heat were initially looking for when they first started listening to Jimmy Butler trade offers in December, but it sounds like they have some offers on the table or have had lengthy conversations that are teams other than the Phoenix Suns. The Suns are a complicated situation. They'd have to find another team to take on Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal has a no trade clause, so he could basically veto any deal if it sends him to somewhere where he doesn't want to go. And, you know, even though Phoenix has been very motivated to get Jimmy Butler, they've just run into those complications. But I think now that Miami has essentially lowered their asking price just to turn the page on this Jimmy Butler situation, I think other teams have kind of come out and made offers. And I think by February 6th, the Heat will have made a decision on, you know, kind of choosing the best of some of these worst offers that are coming in. Again, I don't think it's going to be an offer that's going to blow anybody away. I don't think the package is necessarily going to set up the Miami Heat for a very bright future or necessarily get them a superstar or anything even close to that. It'll just set them up for a little bit more flexibility, but most importantly, it'll get them past the Jimmy Butler situation.
So from the Heat's point of view, from your point of view as a fan, someone who loves this Heat organization and it has a pretty nice young roster, you're winning games this year, Tyler Hero's really putting together his best season. From the Heat standpoint, what's the best possible outcome as far as player acquisition, knowing, as you said, the price has dropped, all the drama that's surrounding him? I mean, what do you think is the best type of deal that they could pull off as far as getting guys who can in return that can help them win this year?
A couple role players.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe a draft pick, like a couple of guys who can step into the rotation. But more importantly, I'm looking at the contracts that they bring in also. You don't want to end up trading Jimmy Butler and ending up with a lot of long-term money either. And that's why, you've heard that the Heat are eyeing the summer of 2026 when a free agent class of could include guys like Luka Doncic, De'Aaron Fox, Kevin Durant, Trae Young, a bunch of guys. And we've seen the Heat, if they don't have a superstar on the roster, if they don't feel like they have an opportunity to compete for a championship, then what they are going to prioritize more than anything is flexibility within the salary cap parameters. We saw this in 2008 when they started prepping for the summer of 2010, which ultimately brought them LeBron James and Chris Bosh to go along with Dwayne Wade. We've seen them do this before. And so with Jimmy Butler gone, I think what the Heat will be doing is kind of waiting for the next superstar to shake loose. And I think what they're going to want is just the salaries that they can use to either stack up and match salary in a trade and get some draft picks potentially in return also for Jimmy Butler that could be used in that trade, or those contracts that come off the books and provide, that maximum level salary in the summer of 2026 when that free agent class could be potentially a game changer for them.
So yeah, it feels like it's an untenable situation that, hey, it's about let's build for the future, develop these young guys. We know that you have to have trust in a Pat Riley led organization, but I want to go back a little bit. I mean, just a couple years ago, it just felt like Jimmy Butler just epitomized what that Heat organization was all about. Heat culture. He looked like you went to a lab and you make a player that was going to play for the Heat. It'd be Jimmy Butler that comes out. Where did it all go wrong? And what do you think is the impetus for all of this?
They didn't pay him. Pay him. When Jimmy Butler, this summer, he was eligible for a 2-year, $113 million contract extension. And the Heat, not only did they not give him the max extension, they didn't even entertain the idea of sitting at the table and negotiating with Jimmy Butler and his representation. They just weren't going to hear it. And the reason is because Jimmy Butler just wasn't good last year. He was not available. He missed a bunch of games. He only played in 60 games last year for Miami. And that was how many games he was on the court physically. Mentally, he might have been engaged for 20 of those games. I mean, it was really just sort of an off year for Jimmy Butler. And the front office looked at that and said, well, he's 35. Players don't typically get better and healthier as they get older. We don't feel comfortable giving you this kind of money, not in this new, salary cap world where, when those really expensive payrolls are very punitive, not just to the owner's pockets, but also to roster construction. And they felt like if we give Jimmy Butler this money, we're kind of locked into a team that has been in the play-in tournament for 2 years in a row now. And because of that, Jimmy Butler, at, again, 35 years old, was kind of entering a lame duck season. And for somebody at his age, I understand where he's coming from. He said, look, I've done all this for the organization. I want to be taken care of. You've treated me like a star all this time. Why are you not treating me like a star now? But the reality was he wasn't playing like a star anymore. And the Heat kind of made that decision and let him know that. And for Jimmy, I think he was looking around and wondering, all right, well, if you guys aren't going to pay me, somebody else will. And then that's when you start hearing things about, Jimmy Butler potentially eyeing different destinations. The Phoenix Suns come into play because we don't know that Phoenix is pot committed to this Kevin Durant, Devin Booker build. And maybe they would be willing and desperate enough, frankly, to just trade for Jimmy Butler and pay him whatever it takes to keep him there. So that's kind of the impetus for all of this. And then, after that, it's, like most divorces, right? It starts with finances and then you end up fighting over like the toaster or something. And you don't even really care about the toaster, but you just don't want your ex-wife to get the toaster.
Yep.
Because you're just mad at her. Stuff like that starts happening. Then you kind of get this petty stuff between Jimmy and Pat Riley and the rest of the organization. And all of that has sort of grabbed headlines and led to these suspensions. And you hear about Jimmy Butler missing team flights and walking out on practices and this, that, and the other thing. But ultimately, this just comes down to the Heat didn't want to pay him. Jimmy Butler wants his money. And this was always going to head in this direction once that decision was made that we're not going to pay Jimmy.
Yeah, and I love that analogy. I mean, I've been saying, hey, it's almost like when your girl is still mad at you, it's kind of a good thing because it means that she still kind of wants to be in a relationship with you. You have a real problem when she's not mad at you and she just has all your stuff packed out and it's my numbers change. It feels like that's where the Heat are at with Jimmy Butler at this point. Now, as far as the contract status, the player option, how that impacts his future destination, is it just a matter of, hey, I want to go to a place that I think there's a good chance they're going to give me a nice extension, but how many teams are there out there that are willing to do that? Is it just the Phoenix Suns? Would another team consider doing that in your mind?
That's a great question. I don't know that the contract is going to be out there the way that Jimmy Butler thought it was going to be out there. And you've even seen Jimmy's representation kind of back off on send us to Phoenix. We want the contract extension, whatever it is, to the point where because these bridges have been burnt so completely that it just sort of feels like this is untenable and you have to move on. And if Jimmy Butler doesn't get that contract from another team, it's almost like, well, we're kind of in this situation anyway, or we can't stay in Miami. But I think Phoenix, and I would bet if you're looking at what Phoenix is doing, right, they're desperate. They need to capitalize on this window that they're in right now. So you almost just say, whatever, if this contract looks bad in a couple of years, we don't really have a choice. We kind of have to deal with it now. The other team I look at that is in a similar position to that is the Milwaukee Bucks, where they have Giannis, they have Damian Lillard. Chris Middleton has clearly taken into a new chapter of his career. And so you end up, he's not the 3-time All-Star co-star to Giannis during a championship run that he once was, coming off of 2 ankle surgeries. They need to upgrade that spot. And so I wonder if Milwaukee would say, you know what, we've got Giannis, we've got Dame. We're similarly pot committed to this group. And Jimmy Butler makes a lot of sense on the court for that team. I do wonder if they would be willing to acquire Jimmy Butler, A, and then B, just sort of pay him to keep him there and ultimately keep Giannis happy, because every time they've ever worried about Giannis's happiness, they've made a major move. They traded for Drew Holiday, multiple first-round picks, a major haul for New Orleans at the time for Drew Holiday. That led to a championship. Then when Giannis was up for an extension again, they trade Drew Holiday for Damian Lillard, and we see where they are now. And now it feels like they're kind of a step behind Cleveland and Boston in the Eastern Conference, maybe New York. What's a move that can kind of take them over the top? Upgrading from Middleton to Jimmy Butler. If you're the Bucks general manager, you might look at that as the final piece of the puzzle. And if you do, and frankly, the best option available right now, where you don't really have the luxury of being patient if you're Milwaukee. So I would guess maybe the Bucks would be the other team. Yeah,
it feels like you just have to buy into the hope that a traded Jimmy Butler that has a lot to play for, hoping to get a better deal. If you link him up with an established star, this championship window isn't massively open, but you could still make the case that maybe you get a couple more championship runs out of Giannis, a couple more out of the Suns. Maybe Golden State considers dipping their toes into the Jimmy Butler waters. That's kind of the best way to go about it. But I want to ask you, I mean, watching this on a daily basis, Jimmy Butler, feels like the numbers don't tell the full story of how good of an impactful player he can possibly be. But I mean, what is he at this stage of his career? Is he a number 3 on a championship contending team? Is he someone that if he has the mindset that he's all in like he was a couple years ago, maybe is it 2? Just what's your evaluation of him as a player, and where has the decline come?
He's a Robin to somebody's Batman, at this point, right? And Robin can steal a couple episodes here and there and ultimately, save the day. And I think Jimmy Butler is capable of doing that in a playoff setting every once in a while. Obviously, in the regular season, he can go off for a game here or there. But Jimmy Butler's value is he's a tremendously efficient player. It's almost in what he doesn't do that is almost as valuable as what he does do. This guy does not foul. He does not let guys drive by him when he's engaged defensively. He doesn't turn the ball over. Like these are just, he's an efficiency, just sort of like he's walking efficiency. And so if you're a team that needs more efficiency, if you need to reduce your fouls, if you need to get to the foul line more, if you need to be better defensively, if you need a little bit more backbone in that way, then Jimmy makes a lot of sense for you. But in terms of being a number 1 scorer, a number 1 option on a championship caliber team, he's not that, and I would argue he hasn't been that in a couple of years now. He's always sort of needed a number 1 in Miami. They've failed to get it, even though they tried to get Damian Lillard, they tried to get Donovan Mitchell, they tried to get Kevin Durant, and they kept swinging and missing. And now they're faced with this situation of, well, it's just not worth keeping Jimmy Butler on the payroll anymore. So Yeah, I think if you were to go to a team, like you mentioned the Warriors, that makes sense to me, basketball wise. Like Steph can be your number one, Jimmy can be your number two. Giannis can be your number one, Jimmy can be your number two. In Phoenix, heck, Devin Booker and Kevin Durant could be 1A and 1B, and Jimmy Butler is just going to be over here being like a number three, just doing all the things that he wants to do, which frankly, at this point, isn't scoring until April. He just wants to do all the other stuff that he enjoys doing. So those are the teams that make sense. That's who Jimmy Butler is at this point, which is a very good player, just not what he used to be.
So leverage-wise, Pat Riley, Jimmy Butler, who has the advantage?
Pat Riley, technically, and by just a hair here, because they're the ones that get to leverage the suspensions. They're the ones that have to call the league office and make that trade call. Jimmy Butler can't trade himself. At the end of the day, he needs Pat Riley to trade him. And that's why I would say by a hair here, the Heat have more leverage than Jimmy Butler does in this situation, even though Jimmy Butler can and has tried to tell teams like Memphis, don't trade for me because I'm not going to resign there. And so he's able to wield a little bit of leverage in that way, potentially. But frankly, like both sides did not play this well and lost a lot of leverage. Nobody gained leverage, right? Like both sides sort of lost leverage in this entire situation. Had they gotten together in July, say, when after Pat Riley's end of season press conference, when he basically let the public know we're not going to sign Jimmy Butler to an extension, had they gotten together in July and tried to hash out a better future for both of them, they'd probably both be happier at this point. This is way long overdue at this stage. Neither side has handled this well.
Yeah, it feels like, hey, Pat Riley, he's used to getting what he wants. He's the guy who puts the rings on the table when he's trying to recruit free agents. Jimmy Butler's a guy that he's strong-minded. He wants to get what he wants. But a couple more here will get you out of here. Wes, you're a fan. I mean, you're professionally one of the best at what you do, but you're a fan of this organization. You were a fan of this player for a long time, seeing what he did for you. What is Jimmy Butler's legacy like in Miami now? I mean, this is someone that kind of restored the franchise, took it into some finals, felt like he was the ultimate Heat culture guy. I think a big face coffee. I think in the bubble. I mean, he was just so likable. Now it's like he's turning into this villain where it feels like, oh, what about those stories in Minnesota? What about those stories in Philly? Does it feel like the real Jimmy Butler has kind of come out, or just kind of, I know it's a complicated, nuanced question from your end, but I mean, just what are your thoughts on just his legacy in Miami now?
This is going to be great to study, over the next couple of years, but just personally and anecdotally, I know that Jimmy Butler still has a large fan base in Miami. There are people that will ride and die with him and blame the organization for not paying him. I tend to think that those are maybe younger fans who Jimmy Butler was kind of their Dwayne Wade, their Alonzo Mourning, right? Like younger fans who didn't watch those guys in their prime. Jimmy Butler was that for them. And so I sympathize with them, and I really do. But in my mind, his legacy is ruined by all of this. It shows that all of the stuff about, oh, Jimmy is such a great fit for Heat culture, and we finally figured this out, and this is a great marriage. As soon as money got involved, all that stuff went out the window. And so it kind of just, it mucks up all that old stuff that the Heat fans were telling themselves over the years, where we fixed Jimmy Butler. We were the perfect fit for him. Well, as soon as money got involved, he didn't care about Heat culture anymore. So was it really ever a good fit? Was he ever really bought in? Was he ever emblematic of Heat culture, or was it just a marriage of convenience? And from now, it feels like the latter. It was a marriage of convenience. And ultimately, the run had a lot of highs. It also had a lot of lows. And this wasn't a guy who embodied the Heat culture stuff as much as I think people wanted him to, right? He didn't play hard in the last couple of regular seasons. For the team that, paints on the court, meanest, hardest working team in the league, that was only applicable to their star player for a couple of months out of the year for the last couple of years. So, and at the end of the day, he did not raise a championship banner. He didn't win a trophy. And as cold and as ruthless as it might sound, like that's what we're playing for. That's what it's all for in Miami. And I do think that the Heat need to have a high standard. I think Heat fans should also have a high standard based on the history of this organization, where if you want a championship, like there's always a chance that you can come back. And like Shaquille O'Neal, rough exit from Miami, won a championship in 2006, has his jersey retired. Right now considered again a Heat legend, repaired his relationship with Pat Riley and the rest of this organization. I don't know that exists for Jimmy Butler the way that this played out. This is uglier than anything that's ever happened with Shaq or even Dwayne Wade in 2016. where the front office and D Wade couldn't come to an agreement on a new contract, all that stuff. I think the bridges have been completely burnt between Jimmy and the organization. I would be surprised at this point if the jersey ever went up. Maybe this is recency bias, but to me, this tarnishes his legacy, and it's really sad to say, but that's just personally how I feel.
That's how it feels. That's how I feel. I mean, not expecting a Jimmy Butler retirement jersey ceremony, a statue. I don't think Pat Riley's going to get a discount at Big Face Coffee. I think it's going to be pretty for sure. But a couple more. So percentage chances that he's a Heat after the deadline. I mean, is it fair to say 0%?
I'll go. I mean, you never want to go 0% on this stuff, but I'll go like 5%. You know, it feels like both sides are ready to move on. 5%.
Okay, so last one to get you out here on this one. Miami Heat, they have some of the best jerseys in the history of the NBA. What is your all-time favorite Miami Heat jersey? I'll go first. I got to go black Miami Vice. So clean, the court alone, but also Tim Hardaway 90s with the red, with the crazy drop shadow, the morning, and then Tim Hardaway. I think it's my red Heat from the 90s, and then the black Miami Vice. But I got to know from you, Wes, what is your all-time favorite Miami Heat jersey?
So the Vices are awesome, right? I love the white Vice jerseys that they brought back for this season. The black Vice jersey, I'm with you. I think that's my favorite Vice jersey is the black one. I'm kind of boring here. I go just I love like those old black jerseys with the drop shadow on the numbers. Like but the red ones are great. I like the current red ones the most. Like it's just a perfect kind of mahogany tinted red. It's the perfect tone of red to me. I think it's super clean. That to me is my favorite jersey. And I don't know, off the top of my head, it feels like they always win in those jerseys, but I obviously would be wrong. I don't know where the best record is, but a little bit of a deep cut here. They brought back the Miami Floridians jerseys for a couple of different times, and they did it during the Big Three era. And it was a black jersey with this like bright pink and white vertical stripe right down the side, like a racing stripe on one side.
Yep.
I thought those were sick, and they kind of did like a whole like 70s theme around it. And
had the number up on the top. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I've always really liked those. You can't find them either. You got to go like on eBay and stuff. And I would love to get one of those.
No, I like those. The only ones I didn't like, I think, were the tuxedo whites. Outside of those,
awful.
I mean, that's the only one.
The players designed those, and
they did. I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yes,
but
they were never allowed to do that again.
But Wes Goldberg, the host of Locked On Heat, you can find his work. The Ringer, you've read him. The Miami Herald, fan site, he's everywhere. All things Heat, 24/7, 365. We appreciate joining us here today. And yeah, man, hey, I know that you're ready to kind of get past this. You got to be pretty exhausted by Jimmy Butler at this point. But thank you so much. We really appreciate joining us here today, man.
My pleasure.
So there he goes, my man Wes Goldberg, breaking down the whole entire timeline from Jimmy Butler. And got to hear it in his voice. I mean, one thing really stands out to me from what he's saying here is that there's an entire generation of Heat fans that grew up where Jimmy Butler was their Dwayne Wade. And it's very difficult for them to see their guy that led them to 2 NBA finals get shipped away in the way that it's going down. And look, there is the whole saying, man, if everyone around you is the a-hole, maybe you're the a-hole type thing. I don't think this applies to Jimmy Butler. I want to say that because I think he's getting a bad rap from that standpoint. I just think that this is 2 guys in Pat Riley and Jimmy Butler that are used to getting what they want, that they're not going to back down. He hasn't gotten paid, so he's like, why should I go out there, risk injury, play hard, take prime years off my career to play for a franchise that is not paying me what I think I'm worth? So can Jimmy Butler help a team? I think he certainly can make a team more interesting. I'll tell you this right now. The team that Jimmy Butler gets traded to, I don't think it's going to win the NBA championship. Whether it be the Bucks, the Warriors, the Suns, I don't think those 3 teams are going to win a title, but it'll be more interesting. But what say you, J-Rob?
Again, I agree with the point of this is definitely the front office and Jimmy Butler clashing. This is clearly Riley and Butler not getting along. They don't see eye to eye. 2 really strong personalities. And I think I understand both sides. Pat is like, there's a certain expectation that we want you to reach. And Jimmy feels like, well, I took you to 2 finals. I deserve the benefit of the doubt. And I think as fans, we can agree to disagree with both. But I will disagree. If he goes to Milwaukee, that is the team that I think he can help lead to a championship. Obviously, Giannis will be the 1, Dame will be the 2. And Jimmy Butler would be, to me, the best third option in the NBA because he does so many things. He's a Swiss Army knife player. He can shoot a little bit. He gets to the basket and play some defense. And I think for a team where Chris Middleton is kind of not the same player that he's been, you plug in Jimmy Butler, I do think in that Eastern Conference, that team does have a shot. Because, again, we've seen Giannis take over a finals before, and he's that dominant of a player. You added Jimmy Butler as another assassin out there, I think you might have a good recipe.
Yeah, I just don't think he's that assassin at this point. But yeah, I certainly think that he could help them. I'm not gonna say he won't, but I think guys like Jimmy Butler, Kyrie, Draymond Green, at one point during their career, are they worth the headache? And they're worth the headache when they're first team All NBA, when they're helping win titles. They're not worth the headache when they're falling out of their prime. And I think that it's difficult for Jimmy Butler to accept that he's not the guy that he was even a couple years ago. Do I think he's better than his numbers reflect now? Yes, I think he provides more value than a guy that scores just over 17 points per game. But you're 35. You don't deserve max money. It's not going to be with the Heat. I think the Heat are going to be better off in the long run. So I think Jimmy Butler's going to be better off in the long run too. But if you're Jimmy, don't expect a bobblehead night. Don't expect number 22 to be retired. Don't expect a statue in Miami, because had you stayed there, kind of did your Paul George where you just play out the final year of your contract, I think that a team would have taken care of you. You would got a team like Philly that would be willing to pay you, but he's in the situation he's in now, and we'll see what happens with Jimmy Butler. But next, got another interview, and it's been kind of a scandalous show. We got the scary Terry betting situation. Now we got another sign-stealing scandal. And if you haven't been following the story with the Michigan Wolverines for the last couple of seasons, Connor Stalions was a guy that worked for them. It was supposed to be a scout, advanced scout, that basically took it a little too far, to the point where there was a game between Michigan State and Central Michigan, and he was there to scout and get signs for Michigan State. And he was on Central Michigan's sideline, and he was wearing a Central Michigan polo in shades. So it's not illegal to steal signs necessarily when it's the day of the same game. It is illegal to be in disguise attending a game and using those signs to help you get a competitive advantage. But J-Rod, I want to ask you, man, you're on the defensive side of the ball in a game and you're stealing signs. How does that impact you as a defender? And do you think that Michigan, if they truly did have these signs and they knew what was coming from the offensive side and the defensive side, how big of an advantage do you think it gave them? And do you think that they are national champions in 2023 without Connor Stalions?
They were the best team in football that year. I think it was no question. One of the best defenses, best run game in all of college sports. So I'm not going to discredit them for winning that national championship. I think they were the right team and they deserved it. As a football player myself and having my own experiences, if I know the signs as a defense, it does make things a little bit easier because you kind of know what you're going to get on certain down and distances. But Doug, in most meeting rooms throughout a week, coaches are already noticing those things. It's the fact that Michigan is doing something that everybody else is doing, and then they upped the ante and took it to another level. Because we were looking at signs when I was in college. You're trying to get whatever competitive advantage that you can get. But to go on a sideline and disguise yourself as a member of a team's coaching staff, that's another level of, doing whatever it takes to win, I guess. But I do feel like ultimately they do deserve some harsh penalties. Now, I don't know if the NCAA is going to come down on them, with the hammer, because Michigan is still one of the biggest brands in college sports. You want them to be in college football playoffs, in the NFL, in the NIL and college football playoff landscape. Michigan is one of those brands that the NCAA wants to be in the spotlight. The reality is I only see maybe Coach Moore getting a suspension of a few games and some scholarships being taken away, but I cannot see a bowl ban coming to Michigan. I just highly doubt that.
We'll see. I think it depends on the outcome of the investigation. If they're going to negotiate some type of lesser punishment, if the NCAA feels that there was a lot of wrongdoing. But here's my conversation with Ross Dellinger. He's the guy who broke this story. He's one of the top college football writers in America. Here, give a listen to my conversation with Ross Dellinger.
Ross, the first thing I want to get into is just kind of the background of this story. A lot was made a couple of years ago about Connor Stallions and the investigation, but where's that right now as far as Michigan, as far as the NCAA, and really what's the next step?
Yeah, it's kind of a lengthy process the way it all works. There's certainly multiple steps. The first step was obviously the investigation that got complete over the summer. And then the next step was the NCAA sending Michigan the notice of allegations document, which happened in August. And then we just got to the next step, which is Michigan's response to the NCAA's notice of allegations, which is the story we had earlier this week. And then there are a few more steps in the process. The NCAA now gets a certain amount of days. It might be like 30 days or 60 days to respond to the response, basically. And then after that, basically, the case goes to the Committee on Infractions, which is a group of non-NCAA employees, non-school officials that will rule, basically, on what the punishment may be. And so we're still weeks, if not multiple months away from the Committee on Infractions ruling. And it'll be much like a court hearing, a court case. You'll have Michigan administrators fighting on their behalf against the NCAA's enforcement and infraction staff, giving their arguments in front of the panel.
Yeah, and as far as how this impacts Michigan and the national championship they won last season, of course, Harbaugh is now coaching in the NFL. But how could this impact Sharon Moore? Because you look at some of the details of the report, it says that he deleted 52 text messages with Connor Stallions, and his response was that he was angry, that someone like Stallions could do this to the program, and just kind of how could this all impact Sharon Moore moving forward for Michigan?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest impact to any current Michigan employee or the team in general is the head coach Sharon Moore, who, like you said, acknowledged that he deleted 52 text messages on the day that the story originally broke from us about a year and a half ago, October of 2023. On that day, he deleted all his conversations and messages with Stallions, and he claims in the Michigan response he did that out of anger, frustration, like you said, didn't want one person like Stallions to receive all the credit from what Michigan did, taken away from players and coaches. So he said that's why he deleted it. It was not to hide anything, and he ended up acknowledging that he deleted them. And the messages, because they did an imaging on his phone, he did turn over his phone to investigators and all that. So there was an imaging on his phone, and through imaging, you could see deleted messages. So they were able to see it all. And Michigan, this is probably one of the more interesting parts of the document I got, is Michigan's response. It laid out most, if not all, of the text messages, and it described most of them as somewhat innocuous and unrelated to the advanced scouting, in-person advanced scouting that Stallions orchestrated. However, as I detailed in that story, a lot of the texts were about science healing. They just weren't specifically about the advanced in-person scouting. And there are kind of two things playing out here, right? There's science healing, which virtually every program does, and that's not illegal to steal signs during games from an opponent, on TV, on recordings. The illegal part of it is when you attend a game with a future opponent and they take pictures and record their signs on the sideline. So Michigan says that none of the texts were about the latter, and so thus are unrelated. However, often the cover-up is worse than the crime, so just deleting the text puts Sharon Moore in his kind of future as far as penalties. in a little bit of a precarious position. I think that a show cause order or even a multiple game suspension is probably not out of the question from the NCAA, but that'll be a decision for the Committee on Infractions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really stood out in the piece is the part where you mentioned that in April of 2023, Stallions did send that note to Sharon Moore that Central Michigan assistant coach Jake Costner planned to visit the facility to meet with Moore. Talk about that situation. And if something like that is proven, then how damning and nefarious is that?
Well, that specific situation isn't really illegal, right? It happens actually quite a bit. Coaches meet from different teams and give each other advice on how to, compete against that team and strategize against that team. So that specific situation isn't illegal, but what is against NCAA rules is what Connor Stallions is to have allegedly done, which is attend in disguise Central Michigan State game, that exact game that Jake Costner, the former quarterbacks coach at Central Michigan, was meeting with Sharon Moore about just how to strategize against Michigan State. So I think there's a separate ongoing, investigation into the Central Michigan piece. And obviously, last fall, Central Michigan fired Jake Costner amid that investigation. So I thought it was just an interesting text that connects it all. It kind of connects all of this under the umbrella of Connor Stallions.
So it doesn't appear like, based on what you're saying, this is something that could really send a Michigan program to some type of death penalty where you're vacating titles. It's more of, like you mentioned, show cause, possible suspensions. What would be the worst-case scenario for Michigan in this? Would it be potentially losing a title that they won, or is it maybe that the optics of it could force them to replace their head coach? What would be the worst-case scenario? What would be the best-case scenario for Michigan in this situation?
Yeah, I think the Committee on Infractions has kind of tried to get away from vacating wins in championships, because a lot of that is just so irrelevant to the record. It happened just because you said after the fact that it doesn't count doesn't mean it didn't happen, and doesn't mean the banner or trophies will go away. So they're kind of getting away from that. They're also getting away from postseason bans. But I would say, at the most severe possibilities is probably a postseason ban on Michigan for next season, possibly, and probably a multiple game suspension for Sharon Moore, I would guess, along with other scholarship reductions and recruiting reductions and all that stuff. A lot of those things are pretty minuscule, especially in the era of NIL and athlete revenue sharing. But I would say the worst case probably is a postseason ban and probably a multiple game suspension for Moore. At best, you don't get a postseason ban and you don't get any suspension. But there's probably going to be some kind of compromise, because I've been led to believe that if the Committee on Infractions does levy serious penalties, and if the NCAA proposes those penalties and they're accepted by the Committee on Infractions, then Michigan probably will pursue legal avenues after that and pursue litigation. And I'm going to guess that the NCAA doesn't want that. So there could be some kind of compromise at some point.
Yeah, and it feels like, based on your report, Michigan, 137-page response to it, it feels like they're going to fight this to the highest degree.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I would expect I'd expect them to fight it. And again, after the fact, if in the late spring or summer, whenever this actually happens, or whenever penalties are levied, if they are pretty severe, I would guess that you will see Michigan continue to fight and take it to court.
Now, there was a rumor last year about Ryan Day and his brother, a private investigator. All of that was just complete hearsay, rumors, nothing came of that. There's no substance to that at all. He's completely clear in all this. Am I correct?
Well, I think we got kind of documented proof of that, yeah, in the Michigan response. Michigan itself believes that the original NCAA tipster came from its own campus. It says that in the response. That was one of the more interesting things, actually, in the document, is that they actually believed that it came from its own campus, which would lead you to believe that it was a former, probably, employee.
And as far as just, Ross, the overall impact that what Connor Stalions in Michigan was doing back in 2023 and how it can impact winning, how significant do you think it was? You mentioned earlier that this is something that does happen during games. Is it a situation where it's something that happens but they just took it too far? Or how big of an impact do you think actually had potentially on winning and helping them win football games?
Yeah, nobody really knows that. It's kind of a subjective thing about how much of an advantage it was. I mean, Michigan claims in its own response that it wasn't that big of a deal, that it should be treated as a level 2 standard case and not a level 1 serious NCAA aggravated case. You talk to coaches, though, and they'll say it's a pretty big deal if a defense knows that an offense is about to run either a run or a pass, that is a big deal. And that's the main thing that was going on with the sign stealing, is they were able to determine what the opponent was about to execute, whether it would be a run or a pass. And so coaches would say that's a pretty big deal. However, again, sign stealing is pretty rampant, so everybody does it. It's just they don't go to the lengths of scouting in person 52 games and recording the sideline of opponents at those games. And that's what's illegal. How much of that helped? We don't really know.
And you mentioned Mike Hart, the running backs coach for Michigan, and how he responded that maybe Michigan was going farther than what most teams do. What exactly was Michigan doing that was going farther than most teams do when it comes to sign stealing?
Well, it was the in-person scouting, right? It was the attending a game. Allegedly, the allegations, some of which Michigan said are true. They acknowledged in the report that are true, that Connor Stalions or friends or family of his or other low-level Michigan staffers did attend 52 games that involved future Michigan opponents and recorded the sidelines of those games. So that's what Mike Hart, when he got the call from a Rutgers staff member, an anonymous Rutgers staff member saying, you guys are going further than most do, it's referring to that in-person scouting, which is against NCAA rules, which is basically the entire case.
Got it. So this is not something that's on the level of what, let's say, the Houston Astros are doing a few years back, where you're recording signs during a game with a camera and then relaying them through a monitor, anything like that. It's not on that level at all.
No, would not compare to that at all.
Got it. Now, you've been deep into this story for a long, long time. Just from your gut standpoint, how do you think this all plays out?
Well, it's hard to predict the Committee on Infractions and what they'll do, and what the NCAA will propose as far as penalties. But I would guess that Michigan will be penalized in some way, fairly severely, I would think, based on the NCAA's notice of allegations. Again, whether that mean some kind of suspension for Sharon Moore or postseason ban, I don't know. I would guess, like I said earlier, there will probably be some kind of compromise so that litigation doesn't happen. But I would guess that if you're a Michigan fan, you should be prepared for penalties to be levied that are, probably fairly severe when you look at the whole spectrum.
Got it. So penalties ranging from show cause to suspensions of coach, things like that. But you're a Michigan fan that's losing sleep over vacating that title, you should be okay. It's nothing that, as you mentioned. So, Roz, thank you so much for joining us, guys. We'll put the link of his piece down in the description. It was incredibly informative. Anytime you throw in science, ceiling, anything like that, it feels like it's juicy. The interest is up, especially with such a Goliath juggernaut of a program like Michigan. But, Ross, thank you so much for all the great work you do, and really, really appreciate you joining us here today.